You know, this is not like church, and so all you people in the rear ought to think about coming forward here. You're not going to get out any earlier by sitting in the back there. There are survey sheets you'll find around here. That's important. The Department of the Army Public Affairs has asked that for each one of the presentations that we have here during this period here at AUSA, that you fill out what you think the value of them is, and all you have to do is mark everything on the far right side, which says outstanding performances and outstanding information. Today we have one of the most important presentations here in the forums, and that is developing leaders and the key to readiness and sustaining the profession and ensuring our legacy. And Lieutenant General Dave Perkins, who's now the CG of the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, will go ahead and head this panel, and this is a outstanding panel. You'll enjoy this. You have to ask questions. One of the rules will be here, if you don't ask questions, they will ask you questions. So think about this. This is important. The strength of the Army will come from the ability of the leaders at every level, down to the fire team leader, and up to division, corps, and higher commanders. And we're going to run through a period here of great change over the next 5 years. And the way we develop our leaders and the way we use our leaders is going to be important to that. So I'll turn the forum now over to General Perkins, and Dave, go ahead and take it.
All right, thanks, sir. Well, if you've been around this week and listened to the chief or the secretary and others talk, it's no surprise that the Army profession and leader development are really his two big priorities, because he sees his role as Chief of Staff of the Army is really molding the future of the Army, and he realizes it is all about soldiers and is all about leaders and how we develop them. And a number of things have occurred here simultaneously in our Army, and one of them is really on this Monday we published the greatest volume of doctrine that's just been put out in the Army. One of our main portions of that, our warfighting function, is Mission Command. And Jim Rainey's over here. He'll be glad to give you a class on it afterwards. But I will tell you, as I explain Mission Command, it really is very powerful. But usually the question that comes up is, well, how are you going to execute Mission Command? How are you going to inculcate that into the Army? And the way we're really going to do it is we are going to develop leaders. Because Mission Command is very powerful, but it will not work unless we have well-developed leaders that embody Mission Command philosophy, as well as his role as a warfighting function. And so leader development is the essential part of if you went to any of the other briefings here this week about what we're going to do for Army 2020, etc. like that, it all hinges on, you probably heard a lot of people talk about money, and that's important, but the most important resource that any of this stuff hinges on to make sure it's going to all come together is leadership. And that's why we have such an august panel here. None of them need any introduction. I'll kind of quickly go down and talk a little bit what they're going to focus on. Of course, here to my immediate right, General Franks, Corps Commander in combat, former TRADOC Commander, really leader extraordinaire, and has been working on this his entire life and continues to focus on this important topic in the Army. And he's going to be talking about retaining the momentum, and I'm sure giving us a lot of personal examples of his experience and what works and doesn't work in leader development. Next to him is Brigadier General Promotable Skip Davis, Deputy Commandant of Command and General Staff College, and it really is sort of the executive agent for leader development in the Army, Center for Army Leadership under Tom Guthrie's leadership, as well as the entire team, really helps propagate this throughout the Army, and so a great asset to have here. And he's going to focus on institutional and self-development domains, which of course he owns in the Army, so it's good to have the guy that does that for a living. Major General Rick Mustian, you probably all know him very well, at least when you're trying to get assignments out there. And so if nothing else, I would advise you to be kind to him with your questions, because he will write your name down, because he's got a few slots he's not filled yet, I think, assignment-wise. And he's going to talk about institutional, operational domains and assignment policies. And so I think a great sort of way we're going to operationalize this. Next to him, Major General Joe Anderson, currently the commander of the mighty 4th Infantry Division out of Fort Carson. Again, another great leader, commanded brigades in combat at all levels in our Army. and he's going to talk about developing leaders while deployed. Next to him, another former division commander of another great division, Rock of the Marne, currently at the Army War College, Major General Tony Cuccolo, and he's going to be talking about operational and self-development domains, training and experiential learning. Again, a lot of experience both as a division commander in combat and now at the Army War College, working at the strategic level. Colonel retired Joseph LeBoeuf, the Fakua School of Business, going to talk about leader development philosophies in business. As you see, we've tried to get a multifunctional panel here, active, retired, civilian, military, because this is a very broad topic and there's good ideas all around. And then Mr. Tony Stamilio, who I've worked with a lot on leader development. In fact, he and I were just in a previous session talking about the Army profession and doctrine. Assistant Secretary of the Army, M&RA. We'll talk about the M&RA's role in leader development as well, a key part that they play from a policy point of view. So I think we have a wide breadth of experience, and I don't think of any questions that can be asked that we won't get a great answer here. So with that, sir, General Franks, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's great to see everyone here this morning. A lot of old friends, people I've had the privilege to serve with, and those of you serving today. And I'm really humbled to be part of this panel this morning. Truly, those who continue to serve today. I've been honored to serve as the visiting scholar, class of '66 chair at West Point since 1999. And for me, now in really the full autumn of my own years, if I had to reduce perhaps my own experiences to a couple of thoughts, I would say trust is one of those, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And the second is, I believe leadership really makes a difference, tactically or strategically. Now, that may not sound too profound, but I think if I can reduce it all past the equipment, past the organizations, even past the doctrine, I think leadership really makes the difference. And so I believe developing leaders, wherever you're doing it, is truly a strategic activity because you're developing a legacy for future generations of professionals. Now, one simple truth has emerged for me in executing these leader development duties, especially serving with those who are fighting this war and remain engaged doing so this morning, even as we convene here in this room. And that simple truth is, the older I get, the more I listen. Otherwise, I remain trapped in my own experiences. So let me open by showing you a short clip of Captain Dennis Williams, who was serving with the 82nd Airborne Division, 4th PCT in Afghanistan when this clip was filmed. I said I listen. I have a little hearing trouble, but not that bad. Okay, get the sound. There it is.
Directly to the WAV file, see if they can pick it up from the WAV file versus the link maybe I'll look at the phone.
physically aggressive, but they've got to be willing to take minimal guidance, like mission, task, purpose, and intent, and they need to be able to execute, over the long term. This is a platoon leader's fight out here. Platoons are deploying independently into remote locations, and that platoon leader is the man in charge for maybe an entire district in Afghanistan. That's certainly the way our long-term plan will work out. Each of our platoons will be aligned with a police district, and that platoon leader is going to be the man representing the United States in that district. He has got to be able to execute on his own without having to call back up and ask for more guidance. He's got to be a critical thinker. He's got to be personable, and he's got to be able to interact with people. That's a universal thing. Every person, Afghan, U.S., maybe an international counterpart in ISAF understands when they're being treated with respect and when somebody's blowing them off. Platoon leaders have to be genuine. Afghans especially will judge a man by his character and can tell when a guy's being genuine and when he's faking it. And I say Afghans, I mean really anybody can do that.
Okay. Really powerful and enduring wisdom about expectations of our leaders at very junior levels in this disaggregated or dispersed, decentralized set of operating conditions, and their own ability to use discipline initiative to accomplish assigned missions. Just earlier this month, I listened as Lieutenant Sam Herbert, Company A, 1st Battalion, 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment, 4th BCT, 82nd Airborne Division, commissioned in 2010, and who recently returned from Afghanistan serving as a rifle platoon leader, and who, with others in the 4th BCT, to include the commander, Colonel Brian Menace, shared combat wisdom with the West Point class of 2013 in our capstone course on officership. Now, Sam told me his company commander gave him intent and an end state, and then he and his platoon figured out how to get to that end state. Ability to adapt, mission orders, indeed, mission command. And besides listening to those countless stories of leaders over the years of this war from the beginning, and in a brief visit to Afghanistan in the summer of 2011, the other places to listen are in first-hand accounts, in books written by those who have actually been in the arena, and from thorough and professional studies done by Training and Doctrine Command. Two study examples include the Army Professional Campaign conducted by the Center for the Army Profession and Ethic, CAPE, Combined Arms Center, TRADOC, and the Center for Army Leadership Annual Survey of Army Leadership, so-called CASAL study. There are others done as well. Based on information gleaned from studies and a countless number of conversations listening to leaders throughout the Army, let me offer two observations. First, 80% of leaders, NCO and officer, say they learn best by experience, even as they clearly acknowledge the value of institutional and self-development. Second, the wide range and diversity of experiences encountered through the demands of missions over the past, going on now 12 years, have been remarkable and probably unprecedented in Army history. Given that professional growth takes place best by experience, and given that leaders have continually been in these unprecedented experience crucibles that demand discipline initiative within an intent, there has been extraordinary professional growth in our leaders during the conduct of this war. They are professionally way advanced beyond their years at any grade, NCO and officer. And so given these evidence-based observations, and as the Army transitions to a strategic environment that General Odierno discussed yesterday at the Ike Luncheon, the challenge becomes, how does the Army and profession sustain the professional leader growth environment of the last 11 years of war, even as it enters a strategic inflection point. By that I mean how to sustain the developmental environment leaders greatly appreciated and now expect, typified by shared understanding, mutual trust, sense of purpose, freedom of action, the trust granted them to exercise disciplined initiative, and the adaptability that was demanded of them, and the decentralization that they enjoyed, absent those operational demands. The Army, as General Perkins mentioned, just published a concept of command that captures all this and call it Mission Command. Mission Command is all about mutual trust, shared understanding, and purpose. Back to trust. When we were about to attack into Iraq in February of 1991, I was explaining our operational schema maneuver to a group of soldiers, and a non-commissioned officer stopped me and said, "Don't worry, General, we trust you." And I could barely answer because that NCO captured, as non-commissioned officers frequently do, the essence of what we're trying to do as leaders, to earn that trust and then to sustain it through our leadership actions. Mutual trust, one of the foundational principles of Mission Command. Now, absent the mission demand of an operational theater that demanded decentralized operations, trust in leaders within an intent, how will the Army and the profession continue this professional growth operational environment? How does the Army now keep that goodness in an environment where it will likely not be deployed as often and perhaps with reduced resources? How does the Army keep operating when it may not be operating? As I mentioned, about 80% of leaders say that they grow best by experience, even as they acknowledge the importance of institutional and self-development. Over 70% say their higher headquarters underwrote prudent risk. Trustworthiness rates the highest of leader attributes. Clearly, the Army has embraced Mission Command, even as it has only published its formal doctrine this year. Clearly, leaders want to continue to operate this way because of mission demands, current and as they see the future, and because they know they grow most rapidly this way and will be better prepared to assume the broader and more complex duties of the emerging strategic era sooner. And so as I personally listen and study to what all of you are saying, it seems to me the Army's challenge is clear. From what I observe and what I hear, the Army is well ahead of this challenge and working it hard. This publication of this impressive and clear doctrine, developing leaders, is one of our imperatives in the 2012 Army Strategic Planning Guidance. Army Chief of Staff General Odierno lays it out clearly in his marching orders about leader expectations and characteristics of the future force. In his Ike speech yesterday, General Odierno said, "We must embed Mission Command." And yet, changing the profession's cultural tendencies, as we all know, toward control and centralization remains challenging. As Colonel Tom Guthrie, former brigade commander and currently Chief of the Center for Army Leadership, states so well and clearly in an Army magazine article in June of 2012 titled "Mission Command, Do We Have the Stomach for What Is Really Required?" And then there are other opportunities for leaders. General Odierno mentioned yesterday broadening. Captain Williams, who was on DVD giving such profound wisdom about expectations of lieutenants, is on an Olmsted Scholarship in Turkey as we convene here today. Can a profession tolerate broadening experiences? Will a profession continue and leaders continue to see developing others as a strategic requirement, as a strategic activity, and engage in developing others. Less than 60% believe their counseling and mentoring met their leader development potential. Leader development, a responsibility certainly of all of us in the profession. So in closing, I conclude with a question I started out with. Given the superb tactical success and the inspiring initiative, courage, no-quit performance, and yes, great sacrifice of the last 11 years of war, and we see evidence of that here at this convention with Gold Star families, and yesterday by the inspiring presence of Staff Sergeant Travis Mills and his wife Kelsey. Given that, leaders greatly appreciated and now expect that freedom of action, that trust that was given them, the initiative and adaptability that was demanded of them, and the decentralization that they enjoyed. How do we keep that going in an environment where we will likely not be deployed as often, perhaps, although no one can predict the future with any certainty, and with reduced resources? How to keep the Army operating when it may not be operating? Thank you, and I look forward to the question and answer period, but let me pass it now to Brigadier General Promotable Skip Davis to my right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And I see we've got many of our allies here, so buenos dias, mi general. Guten Morgen and bonjour. I'm sure we've got other allies from other nations, but thanks for coming and joining us this morning. I've got the somewhat daunting task of following General Franks. I won't be able to answer questions, sir, but I will address another aspect of leader development, that is education. As General Perkins said, I'm the Deputy Commandant for the Command General Staff College and also the Deputy Commanding General for the Combined Arms Center. And one of my principal roles is in developing leaders through professional military education. So I'm going to talk about that particular component. And as you would guess, like leader development, education is continuous, progressive, and incrementally more sophisticated as you go through a career. Unique to the Army and perhaps the other services is the fact that the Army largely develops its leaders through its own professional military education system. We don't access or hire in senior officers, senior non-commissioned officers directly into our service, our profession. We build them from the ground through a combination of education, training, and experience. And education is intended to develop 4 distinct fields of military expertise: military technical, political cultural, moral ethical, and military leadership and human development. Professional military education is designed to inculcate means teach repeatedly and persistently or earnestly the fundamentals of the art and science of war through repeated, incrementally more sophisticated courses which prepare Army leaders for that next level of rank or position of responsibility. Now, 3 points here that I'm going to come back to. 1, repeated opportunities. 2, this idea of increasing sophistication. And 3, timing. And I'll address each one. The Army invests heavily in professional military education, much more so than large businesses or even some of our government agencies. In fact, I'd say probably all of our government agencies, by providing multiple educational opportunities throughout a career, pulling them out of the line, so to speak, for 3, 6, even 10 or 12 months at a time. And when I've spoken to leaders in the private and government sectors, they're universally surprised, in fact, I'd say envious, of the fact that we invest so much time and effort in developing our leaders for their future responsibilities. Repeated educational opportunities over a leader's career allow us to inject the latest doctrine and concepts, best practices, emerging ideas, and even Army policies into the graduates. And those leaders that graduate then take that new knowledge and inject it back into the Army, thus allowing us to institutionalize and operationalize change. And there's no surprise that the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Sergeant Major of the Army pay close attention to our pre-command courses, where we train our lieutenant colonels, colonels, and command sergeants majors, and our Command General Staff College, Sergeant Major Academy, etc., because they realize that the graduates of those programs will go out and take those new ideas that they want to infuse into the Army with them. Another value of professional military education is its incremental building block approach that provides a leader with progressively broader and deeper and more advanced knowledge, skills, and attributes. Let me just talk about each one of those for a second. The knowledge developed through professional military education is both general and military specific. It begins with the fundamental doctrine and concepts relevant to tactical operations and gradually grows to the operational and strategic levels. And you might think I'm only speaking to the officer cohort here, but in fact, strategic and operational concepts are also infused in the senior warrant officer courses, in the Sergeant Major's Academy, and even in the senior civilian courses. Knowledge also includes understanding of current and future operational environments, those global trends, the current state of affairs, but also the extrapolation of the trends and where they might be going, as well as the human dimension of war, which is fundamental to understanding our profession and executing. So both the constants and changing variables of warfare, so to speak. The skills next I would talk about are the competencies, or the how-tos, as I like to frame it for students at the Command General Staff College, the how to think, synthesize, and analyze, how to frame complex problems, how to solve, then, complex problems, how to collaborate with our unified action partners, joint, sister service, interagency, other governments, multinational partners and allies, and how to partner writ large. This also includes aspects of emotional or social intelligence, how to be self-aware, how to be aware of others, how to understand how to influence, how to engage, how to negotiate, how to communicate. And General Franks talked about listening. I frequently say it's not just about writing and speaking, it's about listening, and listening to understand as well as reading. And then finally, how to manage, and most importantly, how to lead. Finally, the attributes that we get after in professional military education are really all the leader attributes that are in our leader requirements model in the Army Document Publication 622, shown up on the screen. Our greatest emphasis, however, is really on developing the intellect, and it's developing the habits of mind, which you may have be familiar with, but let me just list a few of them. Mental agility, adaptability, that General Franks talked about. It's also creativity, imagination, innovativeness, as well as empathy and openness to new ideas. Now, a unique characteristic of professional military education is time allotted to reflection, in addition to study or research. And reflection time aids learning, as well as provides an opportunity for self-introspection and guided self-assessment with mentors and teachers. And the focus of education, as opposed to training, is on understanding and limited application. It's not on mastery. Mastery comes with additional training and experiences, just like the young platoon leader was talking on the previous film. And so the knowledge gained through professional military education is really meant to prepare those leaders for those follow-on experiences as well as training. The next point I want to make about education is that timing is critical if it's to have the intended effect. Over the last decade of war, as an Army, we favored supporting the fight over ensuring timely education for our officers, warrant officers, and non-commissioned officers. And rightly so. We had our nation's wars to fight and win. But now that operational tempo has slowed somewhat, dwell time has begun to increase, we've got a unique opportunity to get the timing back on track. And why is that important? Well, let me just give you an example from Command General Staff Officer College and the majors that I interact with day to day. Over a third of the current classes have had 2 or 3 years as a major, most of them 1 or 2 key developmental jobs for which the Command General Staff Officer course was meant to prepare them. And that meant that although it was a great experience, they probably weren't producing the output that commanders expected of them or that they could have produced had they been to the course. In some cases, they may have been treading water at a higher staff waiting for that command general staff officer course in order to get into those key developmental jobs, and again, performing probably at less than desired proficiency. And actually, I won't talk about it now, but I'd be glad to talk about it during the question and answer period. We have a new policy out as of a couple of weeks ago called Optimizing Intermediate Level Education, which gets back to getting the timing right for majors. The last item I want to briefly address is the Army Learning Model. Rolled out in 2009, the Army Learning Model applies to how we train, educate, and do self-development in the Army. The key concepts include the 21st century competencies, which are shown on the screen, as well as across the bottom 4 key concepts. Learning-centric environment, meaning that the combination of faculty, facilities, curriculum, and students mix gets at individual learning. That's where the focal point is. A career span focus from accession to retirement, constant learning throughout the career as one progresses, an adaptive infrastructure, which means everything involved in getting learning at the point of need, and finally sustained adaptation, constant refinement through feedback, assessment, and improvement. And one of the key outcomes of the TRADOC's implementation of the Army Learning Model has been development of general learning outcomes for each cohort, officer, warrant officer, enlisted, and civilians. And one of those learning outcomes, specifically adaptability, key for our profession and for our future, is shown on the screen for the officer cohort from lieutenant to colonel. Now I'll conclude by saying that there are a great number of initiatives ongoing to implement the Army Learning Model and improve the effectiveness of learning as it applies to leader development. One of those initiatives is actually being led by General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a joint education review that we're involved in terms of refining what our aims are for joint education, the outcomes for officers and non-commissioned officers, as well as the timing and the content. Again, education is a key component of leader development. It's progressive, it's incrementally more sophisticated, and timing is important. I'll conclude there, and thank you for your attention, and look forward to questions, and I'll pass it off to my good friend, Rick Muschamp.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here today to have an opportunity to talk to the group about leader development and the things that we do within the Army Human Resources Command in support of that, of developing our leaders. And as you heard General Franks and also General Davis and General Perkins talk about, the most important investment we make is developing the future of our Army and our future leaders. HRC plays a role both in the institutional as well as the operational side of leader development, supporting what General Davis mentioned earlier, in principally providing our officers with multiple experiential learning opportunities and opportunities for growth and development throughout their career and throughout their timeline. And our objective, as you see in the center of this chart, is really to make sure that we get the right leader with the right education, and I would add also the right skills, to the right position at the right time. And trying to do that in an era that ensures we, one, develop the leader, whether that's an officer or a non-commissioned officer, and also do that in the world of changing requirements or evolving requirements. I think if there's one thing we've learned over our history is our structure and our requirements continually change. So trying to balance those is the challenge that our organization, HRC, has in concert with some of my friends up here on the panel, making sure that we provide General Anderson with the right forces that he needs to execute his mission, and also making sure that we're getting leaders to the right schools, as General Davis mentioned earlier. So it's a bit of a difficult task. The current career timeline that you see on the top bar on the chart is a flexible timeline for our officer corps. It does have a little bit of flexibility, but I think over the past decade, we may have skewed that timeline a little bit, as you see. And what you see before you is a result of making sure we provided leaders and developed the leaders that we could to meet the emerging requirements of the past decade, as General Davis mentioned. The right thing to do, right decisions. But what ended up happening over that, as you heard General Davis mention, participation in in our professional military education courses kind of lingered, in some cases didn't happen. Our pen-on points for promotion were accelerated so that we could build leaders and get leaders in the position, as well as the sessioning of our officer corps in particular. And we had very high rates of promotion that we've experienced over this past decade. And finally, the time that we permitted our leaders to serve in those key developmental positions really extended. Our officers spent great time, significant time, in successive operational assignments and really became absolutely masters of the craft at the tactical level operations, but may have lingered and not had the opportunity to become fully broadened officers and understand the overall operating environment and develop themselves into truly strategic leaders. So what I want to talk to you about is really 3 or 4 things that we're doing to what we would term renormalize our officer career timeline, and I'll admit we're doing a parallel effort with our non-commissioned officers to make sure that we stay in sync in both our officers and non-commissioned officers. And we believe as we move forward that the timeline that you see represented on the bottom of this chart, and I'll speak to some key points of that, provide us greater experiential opportunities, increases our leaders' depth, gives them a greater skill set, that also better postures them to serve at the strategic level in truly multiple environments, and it provides them the right characteristics and the understanding that they need to move forward. So a few key areas. First is adjusting our promotion pen-on points. Over this past years, our pen-on points for captain dropped to as low as 36 months. And those timelines are incrementally moving back in line with guidance we have from the department that says we promote officers to the grade of captain at somewhere close to 48 months. And we'll get closer really to about 42 months, and we're almost to that point right now. But extending that pen-on point also affords some flexibility for our officers. The pen-on point for major over these past few years has dipped to as low as 9 years, really limiting the time that our company grade officers have to develop those skills and develop those broadening attributes that they need to move forward. The timeline for promotion to major over the next 5 years will incrementally get back to about 10.5 years, which is, if you look back over time, that was about where it was at 2001. And you can see we've accelerated. We're not going to change the promotion pen-on point to 10.5 years tomorrow. It's going to be done in an incremental process. Each year it'll extend out just a little bit. Our pen-on point to lieutenant colonel and colonel have remained relatively steady at about 16.9 years for our lieutenant colonels and about 22 years for colonels. And we believe those are about right, and that's consistent with our doctrine and is also with guidance that we have from the leadership. But adjusting pen-on points does provide us greater latitude, greater flexibility, and a greater opportunity to develop our officers. The second point is getting back to refocusing and enforcing our key developmental timelines. We've had officers that have served in company command now for 48 months, as opposed to what our norm should be outlined in 600-3, and our leader development models are somewhere between 12 to 18 months and 24 months if you're serving in successive commands. And our majors, first, many of them have not had the opportunity to attend intermediate level education, and instead of serving 18 to 24 months in those key developmental positions, are serving 24 to 48 to 60 months of their major's time at the tactical level, at brigade and division level, and not having those opportunities. So getting back to enforcing the key developmental timelines that exist in our doctrine will also provide us greater flexibility and greater agility for our officers. General Davis touched on this, the third point, of timing of professional military education, making strong effort to get our captains to their career courses at the 4-year mark prior to them going into company command. So they have that professional military education, they have those skills and the learning, which General Davis mentioned, before we pass them to General Anderson, and General Anderson places them into command, so that they're well armed, they're well postured, and they're in a position of strength, as opposed to a position of truly a learning shortfall, a professional military education shortfall. The same thing applies at the major level, and as General Davis mentioned, we are going to an optimized intermediate level education, which really becomes a competitive intermediate level education where we identify our best officers at the grade of senior captain and major, promotable captain and major, and we select those officers for attendance at our resident command general staff college and schools of other services and schools of other nations. We're not moving away from the intermediate level education construct. Every officer in the United States Army, every major, will have an opportunity to participate and to complete intermediate level education. But we have a limited number of seats, and we really need to invest in our best and our brightest officers with the greatest potential to continue to serve. And we need to make sure that the population that we're developing is a population that is aligned by branch and by skill with what our Army needs as we move forward. I'm an Adjutant General Corps officer, and I think General Perkins and General Davis always use the term they had more AG officers at ILE last year than they had armor officers. I think that's what you said, right? And it became a
bad. We just said it was a fact.
It was a fact. I agree, sir. And it was a fact driven by availability and not driven by making sure we develop the right officers that our Army needs as we move forward into the future, into the Army of 2020. The other point I'd like to bring up, excuse me, one last point on professional military education deals with senior service college. And you'll see on the chart the timing of senior service college as a norm is not going to change. What is changing, though, over the past few years, and will change even more into the future, are the officers that we defer from senior service college. We have had a significant number of what we call discretionary deferments from senior service college over the past years, in many cases to meet operational requirements. And we're being a bit more detailed and meticulous in the review of those at the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army level to make sure that those officers complete senior service college in a timely manner. And that's important because we've also implemented a policy that we will not allow officers to go into brigade command until they've completed senior service college. And that's a fundamental shift. We moved away from that over the past few years in order to meet the Army's requirements to completing senior service college prior to going into brigade command. The other point I want to talk about is the aspect of broadening. We've been engaged in partnership with TRADOC and with the Army G357 and the Army G1 at making sure we set the conditions to provide our officers and eventually our non-commissioned officers with the individual capabilities and understanding that they can gain through experiential opportunities that result in them being a leader who can operate successfully at the strategic level in multiple environments. As I mentioned, by officers spending a great deal of time in key developmental positions and not moving outside of our tactical formations in many cases, we have officers, a large population of officers who haven't been exposed, haven't developed those skills, haven't gained an understanding of other aspects of the Army, other aspects of our joint community, and all of the other government agencies that we support. We did a rough count just recently and identified close to 30,000 positions, officer positions in the United States Army that, in the Army competitive category, that we would consider broadening opportunities to expose officers to other opportunities. Many of those are educational opportunities, but many of those are assignment opportunities, whether it's the 500 officers that we have assigned to the Joint Staff, whether it's the 1,700 officers that we have teaching in ROTC, officers at West Point, officers teaching at Command and General Staff College, all the way around the world, quite frankly. I mean, as little as 2 positions at the AFI's headquarters for logistics officers at the grade of Lieutenant Colonel. Those are broadening opportunities that expose an officer to a different operation, a different view, and provide a different set of skills for the officer as he moves forward and better postures them to be successful at the strategic level. Going to move forward, and as you see on the bottom chart, where by accelerating or realigning our timelines, getting officers to school on time, realigning our promotion panel points, I should say, getting our officers to school on time, and better enforcement of our key developmental position standards, both at the company and the field grade level, you see that we have windows of opportunity now built into our career timelines in a generic sense that afford officers those opportunities to participate in broadening positions. And those broadening positions in turn better posture those officers to be successful at their strategic level. So that's how we're nested within HRC and the Army G1 with the efforts that you've heard here from both General Perkins, General Franks, and General Davis as we move forward. I'll mention that we're also examining and the leadership has asked us to move forward with implementing a new officer evaluation system new officer evaluation system will focus on the leader attributes and competencies which exist in our doctrine in 622 that was, or 6.0 that was published earlier this week. Our evaluation system that we've operated under since 1997 is a good officer evaluation system. It's served our Army well. But what we have not done well is align to make sure we help us at HRC and across our Army identify the officers with the greatest potential and identify the officers' opportunities to serve in broadening positions. And you begin to see that with the new evaluation report. And we'll make an aggressive effort. The Chief's task to me is to go talk to every officer in the United States Army about the OER as we move forward over the next year. So you'll hear more about that as we move forward. And there's a corollary effort ongoing to review our non-commissioned officer evaluation report also. So I'll stop at this point and I'll turn it over to General Anderson. I look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. That was a quick pass, man. That was a good pass. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Iron Horse 6. How's morale out there this morning? Good. Looks like too many people recovering from hospitality suites last night. Huh? Well, thanks for the opportunity. I'm going to talk about developing leaders while deployed. I think you all know that the understatement of all that is the experience level, maturity level that we all have of our leaders from all the time they have been deployed is second to none. So it's a very qualified force. The issue becomes how do you focus on specific leader development while you are deployed, and it can be done. And many of us have seen the spectrum from as early back as the 101st, back in OIF-1, up in Mosul, where they actually ran an air assault school, to conducting the expert field medical badge testing, all the way to MNDC during OIF-5, where they actually ran the warrior leader course. So it shows it can be done. It's just got to figure out how you can do it. So I'm going to break it down into two parts. One is how do you focus your leader development efforts on fundamentals, how to build your expert knowledge of your force, and then adaptiveness. And you've heard many comments here from the panel already about teaching leaders to go ahead and act and then evaluate their actions versus trying to gather all the facts, collect all the data, and then make a decision and then figure out what to do, but trying to make leaders more adaptive while they're deployed. Obviously, conditions affect all this, but if you look at what has been done and what we haven't done the past 11 years, we've paid for that. But as you watch the drawdown in Iraq and what units did while they were pulling out of Iraq is very parallel now, being mirrored in what's happening in Afghanistan. As you look at this regionally aligned force mission, the one I specifically highlight is the mission in Kuwait. As the Sledgehammer Brigade is there now, my Raider Brigade will go after the turn of the year. What do brigades do while they're in a PTDO, prepare to deploy type order in a region? What things can they do while they're preparing to go do different contingencies in an area? For example, what they're going to do there this coming spring will be the expert infantryman badge test. So there are ways you can do that. As you look, as I just saw in August in Afghanistan, as you have the security force assistance teams being employed, what they're doing when they're not involved with their partners, and as that evolves back to the security force assistance brigade model, there will be plenty of opportunity for leaders out across the battlefield to focus on leader development. And the last one I'll ask you to think about is also the Global Response Force mission, which is right here at home. So while you're sitting in a GERF mode, what can you do to prepare leaders? So obviously you got to determine as a team what level you're going to focus on, division, brigade, battalion. You have to figure out what frequency you're going to try and do this. Is it going to be a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly deal? But obviously conditions will drive that. On the fundamentals perspective, I'll give you a couple thoughts about mission-focused type leader development. I think it starts with everything from physical training in theater, which most people do one way, shape, or form, counseling, property accountability, that can be inventories, that can be layouts, even training and resource management, which is something we suffer back here tremendously for, how you plan and how you incorporate your training planning into your mission execution while deployed. Other areas you can focus on are competencies, marksmanship, maintenance, certifications. Combat Lifesaver would be an excellent example. How do you run? What frequency? To what level do you train to certify as many soldiers as you can with that particular skill set? I'd also ask you to think about exploiting opportunities. It is a target-rich environment for the military decision-making process. We like to say, particularly in the old COIN days and the counterinsurgency days, that we didn't have time for that. We didn't need to worry about that. I think we've learned that was a mistake. So how do you take every opportunity through that thought process to keep working? You heard task and purpose, you heard mission, you heard intent, and what does that all mean? And it's very significant, particularly as we shift to a decisive action fight. After-action reviews, some folks tend to slough those off when they're deployed. I think the same thing that applies at home station applies there. Everything from patrols to full operations. Terrain models, a lot of ways you can do that, but the best that you can maximize what you did well, what you didn't do well, and what you're going to do about it would be something to focus on each and every time. Depending on what infrastructure you're in over there, which location you happen to be, from a forward operating base to a combat operation post to a patrol base to a joint security station, whatever site you happen to be in. Many places now have counter IED lanes. They do have ranges. So there are many things you can do, obviously trainers, simulators, things that you can accomplish to continue to develop your leaders while you are deployed. On the adaptiveness front, it's all about complexity and change, and I don't know how many of you have gone through this yet, but when you take a unit and get out of the old coin model now and actually have to go out and do gunnery, attack, defend, movement to contact, screen, breach an obstacle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's folks that have no idea what you're talking about. So the adaptiveness piece now is going to be more important than ever as we figure that out. There's still the asymmetric piece to it. And of course, that wide area security mission has got a lot of people scratching their head as well. So how do you master all that and develop that? I think the best way you keep focusing on that, what we've been trying to do, is through the Officer Professional Development Program and the non-commissioned Officer Professional Development Program. And I think we all do that at home very well, but once again, when we deploy, we tend to say we don't have time for that. How you figure that out through breakfast, lunch, dinners, through actual conferences. Even we were deployed in OIF-1 with Betrayus, we used to get called together every quarter and do a best practice review about how we were doing business. There's time to do it, and everybody benefits from it. But you've heard all the discussions about warfighting functions today, as we're learning how difficult mission command on the move is. It's very much simpler, as you all know, when you're static. So how do you work those functions from intel? What about these company intel support teams, the COIS? What levels do you have them? Are they relevant in a decisive action fight as they are in a coin fight? IPB, intelligence prep of the battlefield, logistics, info ops, I think the list goes on and on. And of course, you can spend a tremendous amount of time on tactics, techniques, procedures, SOPs, doctrine. How do you build an engagement area development? The average Joe doesn't know that this day and age. So the topics are galore. I think you can all figure that out, how to capitalize off of those. I think what you also need to capitalize on when you're deployed is the Center for Army Lessons Learned, which obviously is with these guys at Fort Leavenworth. They provide a lot of value forward in how they capture what other units have done before you, and they also try to help capture what you're doing while you're there. And you can focus a lot of things on enablers as we keep working joint fires, JFOs, FISTers, ISR, all those different components they can help you with. And another topic I would say to throw in, you've heard lots of it here this week while we've been at this conference, is the profession of arms. I think a lot of people are asking, what does it mean? There's still confusion about what does it mean, because you can look at a bunch of definitions of what it means by ideals, characteristics, principles, traits, lots of defining mechanisms to determine what it actually means. But if you spend time focusing on all the things that have already been talked about, as Skip talked about, character, ethics, trust, values, all those competencies certainly will do you well while you're deployed. Then there's the how to do it. I'm sure many of you have been at the Paul where Sergeant Smith was killed in Baghdad. It can be as simple as that, where many units have gone to watch how an engagement occurred there and what the response was in a TOOT type, I guess we still call them tactical exercises without troops. I don't know what we call them, but that methodology, or staff rise, but you actually go to sites, and there's lots of value when you're deployed and you go to places where actual combat operations have occurred and capture lessons learned. You can do that from a staff ride perspective. You can focus on the cultural, historical of the places you happen to be, and we can never get, I don't think, smart enough on the environments we're operating in. The Center for Military History helps you a lot with that when you're forward deployed in terms of helping steer you in the right direction. But trying, again, just like we've done staff rides to all the Civil War battlefields, how you're contrasting past ops to current ops and what the consistencies are between both ops. Team building, I'd wrap up with a couple other thoughts. Team building, there's always time for team building. Competitions are always a great thing. It's always easy to put up stuff and put up obstacles and go knock your socks off. There's also the social component of it, and I would just say the ceremonial component of it. If you take every opportunity in theater for a promotion, for a re-enlistment, for whatever, if you do those right, it makes a difference. And then the last part I'll tell you is self-development. There's time for that as well, and many units do that very well. Many individuals do that very well. But what kind of reading and writing programs you capitalize on based on what the CSA has put out, based on what you read for whatever particular theater you happen to be going into, the distance learning, the online course stuff, the tutoring stuff, the GT score stuff, and helping soldiers write resumes. And from a two-time chief of staff perspective, I just want to put one plug in. It's about transition. As you know, because of this guy over here, we don't have things like stop loss and all that stuff anymore. So you gotta move people. You gotta rotate people. And guys should be going to school. Guys and gals should be going to school when they can, versus coming out of command over there and being stuck on the staff to be the 15th battle captain. So how you deal with that throughout, reception integration, everything from sponsorship to right seat, left seat, ride, but when you're bringing a staff, how you do everything from checking continuity files to staff orientations to newcomers brief to trying to run courses like you do at home station, like the company commander, first sergeant course are all very valuable. And I would also tell you, even in MNCI during the surge, we did staff assistance visits to all the units on the battlefield to make sure everybody and that all dealt with different topics than you would deal with at home, but commander's emergency response program and things like that, how you ensure that all Title 10 type things or other things are being implemented and used across the board, key leader engagements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's value in doing that as well. So there's some thoughts for you we can talk about later, but I will not take up 18, 20 minutes. I'll meet the standard. I'm trained by Guthrie. Thanks. Cool.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Tony Kuklo. I'm currently the 49th Commandant of the Army War College. I like to say 49. Reminds me that there was a 48. There's going to be a 50. It's just a question of how soon that is. I'm not here as the War College Commandant. I'm here from having 33 months in command of the Great Marine Division, 3rd Infantry Division. I'm going to level with you. I'm talking about leader development at home. You've heard Skip Davis talk institution. You heard Rick talk about personnel policies to support. And Joe just talked the away game. I'm going to talk the home game. I'm going to level with you. During my command tenure, we were R4 Gen addicts, and we lived for the patch chart. However, I was raised by a great generation, General Frank's generation, to know what right looks like in leader development. And the things I'll tell you are the things we attempted, and also the framework that I would suggest that we use to attack this issue and priority back home when not deployed. And so if I could talk to, if you are a leader at any level in an operational unit, quite frankly, a leader of any organization that does not have to do with professional military education and has junior leaders rowing well in the galley of your organization, that's who I'm tailoring my comments to. It's on us to do the leader development. Take Rick's timeline. Let's take a colonel. Let's take a maneuver fires and effects colonel with 22 years of service. At the 22-year mark, he or she has had just about a little over three years and some change in school. The other 19 years belong to us, belong to those of us leading those 19 years. So the leader development responsibility, my main point for you, actually resides out in the operational force. And I would say that, no, I'll just hit it with that. And so General Franks, he said how the sustainment. How do we sustain the developmental environment? Well, the developmental environment is going to be sustained in the operational force. Okay, so how do you approach this incredible responsibility? I mean, the fact that we own the wedge of time of an officer's career, an NCO's career, a warrant officer's career, where it's on us, a leader in the operating force, to make him or her ready to assume a range of responsibilities or be motivated and intellectually curious for the next level of duties they're going to take on. How do we do it? In the assess, teach, train, validate, then assign responsibility and empower with trust. In that model, how do we get to trust? I would say that regardless of rank, officer, NCO, warrant officer, regardless of level, there are two essential tasks in taking your approach to building your leader development program. And a couple are not well understood. The first one is identify your sphere of influence. Now I'm grabbing identify your sphere of influence from being deployed, who goes and speaks to that Kurdish general? Is that my corps commander or is that me? Who leader develops the lieutenants? Let's have that discussion. Battalion commander. Battalion commander, I got the lieutenants. Is that okay, brigade commander? Roger that. I got the company commanders. Hey, brigade sergeant major, who you got? Brigade sergeant major says, I'll take the first sergeant, so I'm going to have the battalion commanders take the squad leaders and platoon sergeants. Just have the discussion and establish that sphere of influence so you understand that first and lay out who's in charge of what. The second thing, and a tip for officers. Officers' start point might be those you senior rate. Look at the cohort of people you senior rate, and that might be the start point of deciding what your sphere of influence is. Because that's certainly your opportunity to interact with those you senior rate in your leader development forum just increases contact time and just improves that ability to write paper on them, quite frankly. Second key and essential action, I think, is figure out and articulate what the end state is. What do you want? I have a lieutenant for 2 years. When the lieutenants leave me, I want them to be able to fill in the blank. I want them to know fill in the blank. I want them to understand fill in the blank. Start with the end state. That's see my war college, but it's a very war college kind of thing, isn't it? All right, clearly, I'm sorry. I digress. But that'll help you build the actual program. All those magnificent things General Anderson said that you might have to just grab opportunistically because of deployed conditions, you can manage, control, select, prioritize when you're home. Okay, so with those two things starting, to help outline your approach to the program, I want to hit you with some myths and misperceptions about leader development in units at home station. OPDs and a reading. OPDs on a quarterly training calendar and a reading list is not a leader development program. Not elements of a leader development program. It's not a program. The point is, if you want to build to an end state, it can't just be driven by a list of events, particularly an inherited list of events. Second, a misunderstanding and myth would be leader development is always done in mass and only by green tabs. No, not necessarily. You want to have certain target topics for certain cohorts. I think I'm preaching to the choir on this, I believe. And it can be personalized. And it should be. An example of the brand new captain who arrives who is suddenly a brigade assistant 3. Well, you might want to have some personalized OPDs for him, personalized development sessions for him or her before they actually receive your trust to execute duties as a brigade assistant 3. A third one would be leader development should be only top driven. No, but it is a climate setter, no doubt about it, but I'd ask you to keep your mind open for leader development topics from anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, I got some of my best leader development topics from UCMJ sessions in officer misconduct. Oh, really? You all think that? Okay, I have a problem. All I'm saying is just an example, an extreme example perhaps, to keep your mind open to where these topics can come from and ride to the sound of the guns of those cohorts. Listen to them. Listen to them at the social event. If politics is what they're talking about, maybe a leader development topic, discussion, and program element that includes the apolitical nature of our profession would be another one. Okay, so be open to that. Fourth, leader certification is not leader development. Leader certification, live fire, maintenance, oh my goodness. Some of the best leader development takes place during things like a certification. The 8-step training model has got incredible leader development opportunities on the front end and the back end. And so the point is you're piecing your leader development program together, don't undervalue or miss those leader development opportunities that to you just might look like another event on the training calendar. And I need to wrap up, but let me finish with this. Rick Mustian and his team is the big Army personnel policies. Beware of and constantly look in the mirror at yourself about the self-inflicted personnel policies that are hindering leader development in your units. These might be policies. They might also be tribal wisdom or urban legends. Like when we go to gunnery, nobody goes to school. That's an example. And so I'll finish up because I'm at time. I would just ask you, if you remember, nothing else is, in the operating force, the home game and the away game is the lion's share of leader development in the Army. And I'll pass it over. Joe.
Can y'all hear me? Does the microphone work okay? It's like old home week for me. It's nice to be here. Good to see General Franks. I remember when my son Jay was a first day at West Point, called me and said, "Dad, I just won the faculty lottery." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, I got General Franks in Battle Command." And it was by far the best course experience I think he had in his 4 years at West Point. Thanks, General Franks. You made a difference in Jay's life. Good to see my classmate Tony Stamilio sitting here. Been a long time, nearly 40 years since we graduated from the academy. He still looks like he did as a cadet. Hasn't changed a damn bit. And I just met Joe Anderson here for the first time. My son Jay, Army Captain Sapper, is assigned to his division, currently with 4th Brigade, 4th ID in Afghanistan. So Jay's under his care, and we hope to see him back safely here before the end of the year. So I feel like Kevin Bacon in a way. It's kind of like I connected with a lot of people. I've been retired for nearly a decade. And been out of the net for a long time. And so when Tom Guthrie called me and said, "Geez, Joe, we want you to serve on this panel," I actually laughed out loud. You know, why in the hell would you want me to come talk to a bunch of soldiers about leader development? The Army already gets it, right? So he convinced me to be here. And so why should I be here? And why should I be talking to you? And what enables me to sort of lecture you potentially on leader development? So let me tell you a little bit about what I've done the last decade that might provide some insights as to why I might be of value in this place. As an Army colonel in 2000, I served on Eric Shinseki Army Training and Leader Development Panel study. It was a 3-year study. I was the only colonel to serve on all 4 panels. It was the most elaborate and detailed internal study the Army had ever done on itself. And many of the issues that we discovered inside that panel still exist today. I mean, they're trenchant, they're cultural, they're embedded in how we operate. And that was back at a time when our operational tempo wasn't nearly as high as it is now. I was deputy head for the Department of Behavioral Science and Leadership at West Point for a number of years, in charge of the core leadership course, in charge of the leadership and management majors, 30+ courses, and I was also our version of the dean of the graduate school, the Eisenhower Fellowship Program, which enables TACs to be leader developers of cadets. And it's a 1-year, very intense program in a partnership with Columbia University. So I did that for quite a while. I was the lead investigator for a company called ANSWER that was tasked by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force to study the leader and character development challenge of the Air Force Academy for a year. The study that we generated actually had some fundamental change of how the Air Force Academy develops their cadets as leaders of character. I did the same thing for General Bob Van Antwerp when he was Commander of Sessions Command, helped him benchmark leader development outside the military to compare against his 270+ ROTC programs, a 9-month study. And it allowed me and the other investigators to really spend 9 months looking at how others develop leaders. Business schools, Fortune 100 companies, other academic institutions, government agencies, and not-for-profit. And so a lot of what I might say today is based on that particular study that was done 3 or 4 years ago. I'm currently working as a contractor for CAPE, which General Franks mentioned, the Center for Army Professional Ethic, on a program to revitalize the sense of the profession in the military and what it means to develop leaders of character. I've done 8 week-long programs now the last couple of years with the team from previous group, and I've learned a lot about how we go about the leader development, character development challenges inside the profession, and the struggle we're having in terms of making that happen. In the last 9 years, I've been charged by the dean of the Fuqua School of Business to build a leader development program for business students, 1,000 of them. We run through our programs in 2 years. That is a significant challenge because business students aren't inherently interested in leader development. They're interested only in making more money. And so how do you get them to think about their roles as leaders in a world that needs them more than any other place, I think, in the world of business? And you all know the story of that. Fuqua School of Business has a very large contingent of ex-military enrolled in the program, over 30 or 35 folks, which is pretty substantial in our MBA program. And I interview most before they get there as part of their process. And many have left the Army or are leaving the Army because of what they view as a lack of effective development and career management. Not because they dislike the profession, it's because they don't feel like they're being developed inside the profession, right? And they're leaving for that particular reason. And that's, that my sort of summative view of all those interviews. And so I've tried to stay connected to the Army for the last decade after spending 34 years in uniform. And teaching and leader development is my life passion, and how I try to make a difference and matter. So what does the business world do that would matter in any way to the Army? Frankly, business schools aren't the best exemplars of effective leadership development in any way. They have great rhetoric, not often followed by great consistent practice, although some do some very interesting things for sure. Now, if you think about it, in some of the best business school programs in the country, many are being run by ex-Army leaders. Lieutenant Colonel Todd Henshaw at Wharton, Colonel Sean Hanna at Wake Forest, Colonel Scott Snook at Harvard, Colonel Pat Sweeney at Gwinnett University, Brigadier Tom Colas at Yale, and I'm at Duke. And so there's many more out there. And so what business schools do is they go look for ex-Army people to help them run their programs because they know what Army folks or service people bring to the table when it comes to knowledge about leader development. So for them, it's not a secret, okay, about where to go when it comes to leader development. So they take a lot from the services. Be No Do is in a lot of programs in this country, not only in business schools, but in some Fortune 50 companies. Go look at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals or Procter & Gamble or Medtronic, and you'll see those words. One of the top businesses for leader development is Procter & Gamble. Who runs P&G? Bob McDonald, West Point 75, 5-year infantryman. And he's applied the Be No Do framework to how he builds leaders in P&G, and it's one of the top companies in the world. So no branch, in my mind, Army, no branch has better codified a system of leadership development than the Army. It's well stated. Challenge is in the moment, it's not well understood. It's not really executed very well, and nor attended to. I did an OPD at Fort Bragg 2 or 3 years ago for deploying brigade, and had all the senior leadership in a room for about 6 hours talking about leadership and leader development. And I asked them, who has read our doctrine? How many hands do you think went up? None. The Russians used to worry about us because we didn't read our own doctrine. That we freelanced, and they couldn't predict what in the hell we're going to do. We don't read our doctrine. People aren't really. We have this wonderful doctrine. We just don't seem to read it. It doesn't seem to be important. So the doctrine is there. It's a matter of now making it live inside the profession. So when you have discussions around leadership and leader development, you must be grounded in a clear understanding of developmental concepts. How in the hell do people develop? You got to sort of introduce the word, which I think in many military venues is scary, and that's the word theory. Holy shit, we're talking about theory. People don't necessarily like that kind of word, but there is some theory out there that in fact is relevant across a lot of contexts, and not just rely on our developmental folklore for what leadership looks like. So here's some core principles that I've learned in a long period of time engaged in this. And it's really a series of just 3 C's, and some of these have been mentioned already. Leader development, developing of human capital occurs if 3 core things happen. The first one is intention. Okay, Tony said this recently. You got to have the intention to develop. And you got to take a transformational view of human beings and not a transactional view. A lot of business folks in the business world simply see people as tools to get work done. And they just work with them as transactions. You get work done for me, and they don't care whether the work matters to the person doing it. Our disengagement statistics in the business world are extraordinary. 70 to 80% of employees in today's organizations are not engaged in work. It's not meaningful. It doesn't matter to them. It's simply transactions to be achieved. Wayne Downing, when he worked for Noel Tichy at the University of Michigan, talks about having a teachable point of view, is seeing your human capital in transformational terms. How do I turn every task that I give an individual in an organization into a developmental task and not just a work task? Is think about our capital in terms of transformation is the first thing. Second thing is ownership. I mean, leader development has to be owned. In the business school, the big challenge I have is that students tend to wait around for me to deliver development to them as if it was a stack of PowerPoint slides. They don't take responsibility for their own development, nor does the institution sometimes hold them accountable for that. And so you have to own your own development. And the institutional leaders have to own their responsibility to develop others. Really own that, you know, to recognize that your true legacy will ultimately be the people that you leave behind, not in bricks and mortar. How have you changed them as human beings? Are they fundamentally better people because they connected with you? And that's the whole idea of ownership. And the last thing is what we all don't do well is accountability. It's got to be built into everything. You got to hold people accountable for their development. Individuals have to be accountable for their own development and not wait to be developed, not wait to be mentored, not wait to be given feedback, to go seek that. And the leadership's got to be held accountable for the developmental journey that their subordinates are on. The business world does this. If they make a mistake in terms of leaders, it costs them a lot of money, and that hurts. All right, and so they spend a lot of time making sure they get this right. And so succession planning, developmental accountability is huge. So that's the first set of threes. The second set of threes, it's sort of been mentioned already, is one, you got to have challenging experiences. General Franks already said that, is that we have those already built into our system. Challenging, stretching experiences. The second thing, though, is that it's not just about having a commander's intent. You got to make sure that people are ready for the experiences that you're going to give them. And so as leaders, do we think about, are my subordinates really ready for the challenges I'm going to present them versus just giving them a challenge and hope that they sink or swim? You know, you have to know your people really well to know what they need in terms of knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to be effectively developed in the experiences you're going to structure for them. So having that readiness understanding matters. And the third piece, which I think is unbelievably ignored both in the Army and in business, is the idea of reflective practice. You know, I spent my career probably through major spinning like a top, 17 different assignments in 20 years. I moved all the time. And so I was spinning, getting stuff done, and never reflecting on anything. It wasn't until I went to grad school for the first time that I was forced to reflect. I was really forced to come to grips with who I was as a human being in the world. And so reflective practice coupled with 360 feedback and powerful coaching and mentoring systems is how the business world differentiate themselves from others when it comes to development. They invest a lot of money in 360 feedback and executive coaching, right, to help their leaders become better, because you can't do it alone. You've got to have a structure and a support system that makes that happen. So if I look at all the things I've learned about leader development from my studies, it comes down to this one slide. And probably you can't see this if you're way in the back, but let me just quickly walk around. Leader development, this centerpiece, as Tony says, has to be targeted. You have to understand what you're developing for. In the business school, we develop our students to be called what we refer to as leaders of consequence. And so that target, however we have chosen to define that target, then guides everything we do. I don't make a choice in building a developmental system unless I think about the trade-offs between A or B. What's going to contribute to a leader of consequence? I don't do what doesn't contribute to that. And so when you look at this developmental model here, you have to, these are the levers that actually affect development, right? And this is sort of the conceptual frameworks. And so the more levers you can pull, the more effective you might be. So you got to have continuous education and training, for example. Not just sending, you know, we send folks to school for sure, but in the business world, they don't have time to do that because they're so busy. So they do just-in-time stuff. They do quick stuff. They do, you know, 2-week immersions and not let people go for a long time. So distance education, really just-in-time education training with partners allows them to provide education training when it matters most and not wait till someone's in the school cycle to get that. So thinking through what that might mean for the military. What's your theory? I just described 2 aspects of what a theory of human development looks like. Well-designed, challenging experiences, an action learning paradigm. The military is great at that. Accountability. Do we actually hold people accountable and reward those who do good developmental work and not reward those who don't? Reflective practice and elaborate feedback. Coaching and mentoring matters. Senior leaders have to support a developmental culture. I think that the two most important things senior leaders do in organizations is, one, is they develop their replacements and they build cultures of development. Those are the two legacy things I think that most senior leaders do. I wonder how well that goes in our own profession. Having a competency model and then making sure development occurs at individual all the way through organizational level. These are the levers, and the more you can pull, the more effective your programs will be. And the next slide really sort of encapsulates a lot of what I've already said. Just go through all that stuff. Here's what are the best practice components of the top businesses we looked at in terms of how they develop their human capital. And these are really based on the Fortune magazine's rankings of the top 20 corporations in the world for leadership and leader development. These are the things that they do that make a difference in terms of their worlds. So experiences, identifying leaders early, develop everyone, but make sure you develop those that have the most potential. Develop leaders in their current jobs. Make every job that people have a developmental experience by how you frame it. Okay, not just a transaction, but a transformation. Choose assignments strategically. Where am I sending folks? Why should this person go here versus this person? What's that choice? Not putting a person in a place to fill a position, but the right selection based on that person's developmental needs. Be passionate about feedback and support. Develop teams, not just individuals. Inspiration, and then make development part of the culture. So I mean, these are the key things I think that are relevant from the business world that the Army does at some level, but not good across all levels. The Army defines leadership in terms of influencing, operating, improving. Just 3 verbs. Pretty cool. We spend most of our time in what verb? Operating verb. I mean, just getting stuff done. It's transactions. I interviewed over 100 senior officers for the ATLDB study, and when I asked them all about leader development, the improving verb, most said it falls below the line. I don't have time for it. It's up to individuals to do that on their own. It's a recipe for non-development, frankly, because people are very busy, and they won't make it a priority unless they're held accountable for it. So it's not just about getting stuff done. It's about getting the right stuff done in the right way that produces a developmental experience. So we need to spend less time in the doing verb and more time in the being verb. Being is where we develop our human capital. It's thinking about those people that we're trying to develop. All right, you see my script didn't follow first contact with this august body here. I think I've covered some of the things that weren't said and made some points of the things I thought were really important and relevant. One of the things that the business world does really well is the idea of succession planning. Fernando Aguirre, who's on our Fuqua board, is former P&G, now the CEO of Chiquita Brands, just moved from Cincinnati down to Atlanta. He walked into Chiquita Brands as the CEO, and he was devastated to discover they had no succession planning in any way. They had no idea who was going to be the future replacements of the leaders in Chiquita, and they're a global international company. It took him 3 years. Number one priority is to create a succession planning, so he knew 2 and 3 people deep for every position in his organization. He knew who the next person that was going to fill that, and the person after that, and how they were being developed. All right, that's something that I think the Army has to do better at, and that's real, true succession planning and thoughtful view of how we're going to, where our replacements are going and who they're going to replace. Okay. A couple other things that we can learn. Short duration schooling in the business world matters. So businesses are using short-term duration stuff, 2 weeks to 4 months, 2 weeks to 4 weeks are short duration schooling.